grant writing process isn't always clear, but with the right guidance, proven actionable strategies, and expert insights, the process becomes easier, simpler, and yes, clearer. I am Dr. Trinette, your host of Grant Writing Made Clear, and a former nonprofit president turned distinguished professor and behavioral scientist with 2 decades of grant writing experience. I remember what it was like to be a busy nonprofit leader with little time but big financial sustainability concerns. Over the years, I have transformed my skills from securing $1,000 foundation grants to winning multi-million-dollar federal grants. I created this podcast in response to the grant writing coaching requests I've received from nonprofit leaders, entrepreneurs, and professors over the years. Join me each week as I reveal insider strategies and share key lessons that turn wishful thinking into winning applications. Pull up a seat and get ready to be inspired, empowered, and transformed. Whether you're a beginner or a pro looking to sharpen your skills and create a life you love, you're in the right place, my friend. Let's get started. Hi, friends. Welcome back to Grant Writing Made Clear. I am Dr. Trinette, and I appreciate you so very much for taking time out of your day to listen to today's episode. In the last episode, we defined the term grant to help build our foundation together. We reviewed the different types of funding sources. We discussed why grants matter, and I shared a common mistake people make when writing grant applications. I'm so excited you're here today because we're talking about something I know is on many nonprofit leaders, professors, and entrepreneurs' minds. And yes, that's grants. Grants can be a game changer, but they're not necessarily the perfect strategy for every organization. So I thought today we'd break down the pros and cons of grants, whether it's federal or foundation funding, so that you can decide if grants are the right fit for you and your organization. If you've ever been curious about the advantages and disadvantages of grants, you're in the right place. Before we dive in, I've got something special just for you, especially if you've been feeling stuck when it comes to grant writing. I created a free resource called Think Like a Winner, Unlock Your Path to Fundable Ideas in One Day. This step-by-step cheat sheet will help you discover the perfect idea that funders cannot ignore. Whether you're just starting out or looking to level up, this guide is your first step to writing winning grants with confidence. You can grab it right now using the link in the show notes. Don't miss out. Your grant could start with this tool. Okay? All right, let's get started. So we're talking about the pros and cons of grants. Let's start with the pros because there are so many reasons to love grants. The first major pro of grants is that they provide financial support without repayment. So as we discussed in a previous episode, unlike loans, grants don't need to be repaid. Grants are essentially free money, right? We talked in the last episode about grants being free money with stipulations. And so grants position you to create new programs, hire staff, and enhance your infrastructure, and expand services without financial strain. So grants provide financial support without repayment. That's a major pro. For example, as I discussed in the last episode, I previously served as a president of a small faith-based nonprofit organization. In that role, I received my first grant, which was a really small grant of $1,000. And I used that to create and offer a free summer camp for youth. That money allowed us to hire very part-time staff who were mostly volunteers. It allowed us to pay for supplies, snacks, and ultimately it helped us to reach youth and keep them safe and engaged in positive activities during the summer, which can be a really risky period for youth. So grants allow you to have good impact, and there is no requirement for them to be repaid. So I love grants for that. The second pro is credibility. Also, as we briefly discussed in a previous episode, one of the advantages of securing a grant is that it can enhance your and your organization's reputation. Funders often vet organizations carefully, so being selected for a grant tells others that your organization is capable and worth investing in. So, another pro of grants is that it increases your credibility. It's somewhat similar to the saying, a crowd draws a crowd, right? So if you have a crowd of people at some new restaurant, a crowd is going to come. Same thing. When you get a grant, it shows to funders that you are capable and that can help you get additional grants. I know one nonprofit leader who was struggling to attract donors, as an example, and after they received their very first large donation, donations began to ripple in, right? So grants can add credibility. Another pro is that grants help to enhance the capacity of an organization. It helps to enhance the infrastructure. So some grants are designed to help nonprofit organizations to grow and not simply fund the actual programs. And these types of grants might cover professional development of the staff, software, and so forth. And really, it is common for grants, especially federal grants, to allow you to cover software, travel to conferences, and so forth. Some grants may even cover infrastructure. So that's another pro of receiving grants. And the final pro that I'm going to offer today is that grants allow you to launch large projects that you might not otherwise be able to afford to launch. For example, think of the Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, or other youth organizations that maybe start some programs in the community that serve a ton of kids. It could take a lot of time to raise that kind of money, but a grant will allow you to do it immediately. So it allows you to be able to have a quicker launch of a program that you've been considering. Now let's talk about the cons or the challenges that comes along with having grants. Because while grants are amazing, they're not without their downsides like everything. So one of the primary cons of grants is that they are highly competitive. Grants are very, very competitive. The reality is that a lot of people apply for grants, but funding is not limitless. There's a cap. And that means that competition is fierce. Some federal grants that I apply for, as an example, have a 5 to 10% success rate. So it's not easy to get a grant. It requires skills, really have to understand the science and art of writing grants. So that is one of the major cons, is that there is a lot of competition. And I do want to just say that for those of us who have had a lot of experience winning grants, we would also admit that denial is part of the process. You're not going to always win the grants you're applying for. The key is to learn from the writing process, learn from whatever feedback you receive from reviewers, improve and try again. So you're not going to receive every grant you apply for. The key again is to learn and improve. The key is to persist. That's one of my favorite words these days, is to persist, to persevere, because I believe that's the name of the game. That's the name of the game. Yes, the major con is that it's highly competitive. A lot of people are applying, but I'm here to tell you, persistence pays off. It might sting, rejection might sting, brush it off and keep going. Another con is that strings are attached. We can't say no strings attached. Strings are attached. As I mentioned in the previous episode, grants often come with strict requirements about how the money is spent, which can limit your flexibility. For example, one nonprofit organization received a grant to expand their after-school program, but couldn't use any of the funds for transportation, something they really needed. So it's important that you read the fine print when you are applying for grants. You are clear about what the funders will allow and what they won't allow. And you can be savvy. And so what you might do is then use the grants in the way that you are required to use it, but maybe having that grant will now allow you to get some donations to cover the other pieces that you cannot cover, right? So for the after school program, they received the grant and was able to use that grant to cover staff time and supplies, but they couldn't use it to cover transportation, but they could then go out to the community and say, hey, we have this grant that will allow us to do A, B, and C, but it won't allow us to do D, which is transportation. Will you support our program? Another con is the time it takes to write grants and manage grants. They can be quite time consuming. The grant writing process is honestly quite intensive. And it will take someone away from their other responsibilities, at least to some extent and for some period of time. So when you're writing grant proposals, know that it's going to be a lot of your time during that period. And so it's time consuming. But even after you receive the grant, it can be time consuming because funders have checks and balances to keep people accountable, which can be time consuming and a bit challenging to understand if you're new to grants. There are reports to write, there may be audits, there are deadlines to consider. So you really want to make sure that you know going in that writing the grant is going to be time consuming, but managing the grant can also take some time. And if possible, you'll want to have one person who's responsible for helping to ensure that things are going well and according to the funder's requirement. So, as an example, a federal grant might require quarterly financial reports and in-depth final outcome evaluation reports. Um, and they may also require a final financial report. If you don't have dedicated staff, which again I recommend to assist with writing grant applications or managing grants, it can be overwhelming. Still, I encourage nonprofit organizations and others to train your team to write grant applications, train your team to manage the grants internally, because it is a much higher return on investment when you learn these skills internally. Another con is that grants are short term. They are not forever. They are not indefinite, right? So grants are usually short-term funding awards. Some grants may be 1 year, while others may be up to 5 years, as an example. I personally prefer to apply for grants that are 5-year grants because I do not prefer to be on the hamster wheel of constantly applying for grant. So a con really is that the grant will end at some point. This is not indefinite money. And that's something that you have to think about and build into your timeline, knowing that when you get closer towards the end of your grant, that you're going to need someone on your team to start writing another grant application and another grant application because there is no guarantee that you'll get the next one. So again, grants are short term, they're still amazing, but it's important that you know that you'll need to build in maybe 6 months to a year before that grant ends to start writing another grant application. Another major con is that some grants require a match. That's a pretty big con to me, right? So some funders require that you have another funding source to match their grant amount. As an example, let's say I have some grant that I'm giving people, and I may give you $50,000 to support your program, but then I may require that in order for you to get the 50,000 that I'm giving you, you have to find a matching funding source to give you another 50,000. And this can really be a con, especially if you are a smaller organization, a new organization to grant writing. This can be a major con if the funder requires a match. That's something you want to be clear about upfront. And the final con that I'm going to talk about today is mission drift. To get funding, some organizations will follow the money. They'll follow the money. The problem is the more you follow the money and the less you think about your mission, before you know it, you'll be doing a little bit of everything, right? So today you're focusing on aging, tomorrow you're focusing on youth, the next day is science, the next day is art, the next day is gardening, the next day is dieting, right? So the more you focus on the money and not keep your mission at the forefront, you can be all over the place and you become a jack of all trades and a master of none. So with grants, I encourage you to really think about your mission throughout process, especially at the beginning. And that's why the cheat sheet that I mentioned is really a really neat tool to have in your tool belt because it helps you remember to not only focus on the money, but to focus on the mission. And so if you are thinking about applying for grants and you're new to grant writing, here are a few questions I would encourage you to ask yourself. And the first is, do we have the capacity to apply for and manage a grant? Do we have the capacity to apply for and manage a grant? Second, does this particular grant align with our mission? Does it align with our mission? And finally, what are our plans for sustaining this program after the grant ends? I believe when a grant starts is when sustainability should start. And so you want to be thinking about that even as you're writing the grant proposal is what is our sustainability plan? And a few tips I'm going to give you just before we sign off. The first is if you're new to grants, strongly consider applying for a local grant or state grant or foundation grant before diving into federal opportunities. Everyone wants the big grants, and I understand that. But there really is a method to the madness. And so I encourage you to start with local grants, state grants, and foundation grants before jumping into federal opportunities. The next tip is if you plan to target state, local, or foundations, consider building relationships with them because they may be more likely to support your organizations if they know and trust you. Regardless of the funder, though, my final tip is to ensure that your mission aligns with their priorities, to ensure that what you're proposing aligns with their priorities. As a quick recap, grants can be a powerful tool for you, but they're not a magic solution. I want you to weigh the pros and cons carefully. Take some time, sit down with a notebook and a pen, or maybe you use an app, and really think about the questions that I suggest that you consider today to think about whether or not you want to proceed in the grant writing journey. I hope you do. I hope you do. That's the reason I'm here, is because I believe that so many people are doing good work and want to do good work, but need the funding to do it. And I really want to be your guide. I want to be your mentor and partner in this process. If you're ready to get started but need some help developing fundable ideas, don't forget to grab my free cheat sheet. I've mentioned that a couple times today, and that's because it is really the perfect first step to writing grants that win. The link is in the show notes. Go check it out. Thanks for spending time with me today. Keep doing the amazing work you're doing for your communities, and I'll see you next time. Take good care. Thank you for listening to Grant Writing Made Clear. I hope today's episode gave you inspiration, confidence, and clear information that you can turn into action. Remember, you are not alone. There's a whole community here striving for the same impact. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a quick review to help more people find the show, and share this episode with others in your network. It really does make a difference. For more grant writing tips and resources, follow me on social media. Until next time, keep showing up, keep learning, and remain determined. I'll talk to you next time. Goodbye for now.